Hot Take Hockey Podcast with your hosts, Lucas and John Viveiros.
Hey everyone, back on the Hot Take Hockey Podcast. Lucas and myself, John here. We got a special guest, Mark Seidel, the Director of Scouting for the North American Central Scouting and Director of Player Personnel for the Barrie Colts. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I'm good. I'm a big fan of the YouTube channel, so I'm excited to be here and looking forward to talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. And just as we're getting into the new season, I think we'll kind of balance the conversation here, more so just for yourself, following the league, before even we started recording, you said you worked for a bunch of teams. You've kind of been on the road a lot, following a lot. So just for yourself going into the new season, whether it's NHL, OHL, are you excited for the new season? And just right off the bat, what do you got going on?
I am. The scouting season is so long these days. I mean, when I first started, it used to kind of end in June and started up in kind of October. And now with the Lincoln, the summer and the different things, it's never seems to end. But you know what? When it ends, I mean, this year it ended kind of, July-ish, and then you kind of got 6 weeks off. But I'm not going to lie to you, by the end of the 6 weeks, I'm kind of like, let's get back in the rink. So yeah, I'm excited. This is my favorite time of year. We're starting, the OHL season. The NHL is not far down the road. So, I mean, lots of scouting, but yeah, it's exciting. It's good. And you got a whole new fresh, after a while scouting for the NHL draft, you get tired of talking about the same guys over and over for 8 months. Yeah. So when you start a new season, you get to talk about new guys again and go see guys with fresh eyes. So it's exciting. And I'm very excited.
Awesome. Yeah. I wanted to quickly touch on just what you said there, as far as linking the two drafts, the drafts that we just had in 2022 and the 2023 draft. I've known, following the league and following the different junior leagues, that the 2023 draft seems to be primed a little more with elite skill and a little more depth. How do you compare the two drafts at the top end as far as the 2022 and 2023?
I think the 2023 draft is a very, very good draft. I think you've got two potential, and I hate using the term because it's overused, but we have two potential generational players that will literally transform a franchise. Connor Bedard obviously is the one that everybody in Canada knows about, and then Matvei Michkov is the Russian. Little different because he's on a Russian contract now, and the whole situation with Russia and Ukraine. But both are phenomenal players that I think literally can transform a franchise. Like McDavid did, like Austin Matthews did, some of these other guys. So 2022 draft was a good quality draft, but I don't think it had a ton of superstar potential. I'm a big fan of Slavkovsky and some of those guys at the top, but 2023 is exciting. But I will caution, every year, I've been doing this so long, but every year it seems like when you're looking forward to the next draft, everybody says, oh, next year's fantastic. And then by the time June rolls around, they're like, well, this isn't that great. Next year's going to be great. So yeah, I have a little bit of caution, but I can assure you that Bedard and Michkov are the real thing. And there's a bunch of other guys in there, Fantilli and some other guys too. So I think it's a really, really good draft, and we'll see how the next 9 months plays out.
Yeah, honestly, I think a lot of people kind of talk about the 2015 draft and just looking at obviously what you just said, the couple names there and what we got out of 2015. But yeah, kind of what Lucas alluded to as well, the depth. I think even for myself, like going to be following the OHL a lot in the upcoming season, like a couple names I would throw out just to watch out for would be like Quentin Musty for the Wolves, Callum Ritchie for the Generals. For yourself, do you think, and just working even in the OHL, do you think there's a lot coming out from the OHL in the first round this upcoming year, or do you think it's too early to say? Do you think there'll be kind of some surprise names that will kind of show up in the season?
Well, Cam Allen to me he might be the best defenseman in this draft. So that's certainly exciting. Obviously, you saw what he did in Guelph last year. Cal Ritchie is an offensive machine in Oshawa. Colby Barlow is a guy who's as pure goal scorer as we've seen in the draft in a few years. You talked about Quentin Musty. I think Quentin struggled a little bit at the Helenka Gretzky, but certainly a big, strong kid that has all kinds of ability. So I think it's a good year. Certainly in the Ontario Hockey League. Maybe not right at the top of the draft. We mentioned some of those other guys, but I think there's good depth, and there's probably 5 or 6 first rounders in the OHL alone, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting looking at just different rankings of top 10s, top 15s already this early on, and how it changes throughout the season. In your experience, do you see like what you see in the preseason rankings? Does it really, really shift? Completely differently as the season goes on, and by the end of the season rankings have maybe 2 or 3 names slipped out and 2 or 3 jumped into that top 10?
Oh, for sure. It's again, like these are all young men. They're still kids, quite frankly. And so, you know, if you think of yourselves when you were 16 and then you went to 17, I mean, physically there's huge changes, you know, so there's guys you think about. I mean, if we talked a year ago, I'm not going to lie to you boys, I would say Shane Wright was going number 1 and everybody's fighting for number 2. And that was a year ago. And of course we saw, you know, at the end of last year, our final rankings, we had Shane at 4 and, you know, Slavkovsky at 1 and stuff. So lots of guys come in and out, guys you wouldn't even have thought of, you know, all of a sudden you go watch and you're like, who the hell's that guy? He grew like 5 inches from last year. And so, you know, guys right now that, you know, we might not even have in our top 60 could very well be first rounders. You just, like I said, it's a fresh new season and there's such a gap between that 1 year that guys we think were really good last year, this year maybe not, and vice versa, guys that we kind of thought, okay, they're okay players and come in this year and light it up. So yeah, it's you start off with a ranking and every year at the end I look and it's so different. You're just like, wow, like, you know, what we thought were for sure. And Shane Wright's a great example. I mean, you know, I think everybody in the scouting world thought it was a for sure. And by the end, you know, I mean, he went 4 and if he didn't go 4, he might've slipped down to like 7 or 8. So, you know, it's a long year and it depends on how the year goes.
I'm curious just to ask you as a scout and someone that's been in the game for a while, for like a guy like Quentin Musty, I know he was a high, I think he went first overall in the OHL draft. And I know that size has always kind of been a priority for scouting and for looking for players in terms of maturity. I'm kind of curious to you, when you look at a player and talking to so many other scouts, do you see the big shift? And I would say more so in the last decade with size versus skill. Because I even look at like a Logan Stankoven, who I think some scouts, some ranked 15 to 20 in that draft. But then you have other scouts having him outside of the top 50. Obviously he went to the second round of the Stars, and then now you're seeing him dominate in the WHL, and you're seeing him dominate for Team Canada, and he'll have a chance to play with the World Juniors again after just seeing what he did. And then I even see like Lane Hudson for the U.S. development program. He falls late to the second round, even with how high of a ceiling his skill set is. I think he's 5'8", 5'9". So are you seeing that shift, or do you still think there's a lot of kind of overlooking on some of these younger players, or shorter players, I should say?
Yeah, the way I kind of describe it is if you have a big player and a small player who are very graded similar, you're always going to take the bigger player. It's still a physical game. It becomes bigger, usually can overpower smaller at some point. But you know, I started doing this, guys, in 1990, and neither of you were even thought of being born yet. So back then it was you had to be 6. If you weren't 6 foot, don't even think about drafting them. 6'6" guys, even if they couldn't skate, we'll figure that out. Like it now, the small player has just as much chance as a big player. I mean, you're talking about Logan Stankoven. I think back to Braden Point. Braden Point fell in the draft because he was small and he wasn't a great skater. And look what he's done, obviously, in Tampa and Stankoven and Hudson. There's so many of them now that teams don't specifically say, okay, if he's not 5'10", I mean, to think of 15 years ago, the Hudson kid being a second rounder, I mean, at 5'8" as a defenseman, I mean, he probably wouldn't have been a draft. So it's changed significantly. It's such a fast skill game now that, size is not nearly as important as it used to be. All that being said, like I say, if there's a big guy that has skill, he is going to go higher than the smaller guy. But small guys, certainly have every right and will get drafted high based on where they fit in, not based on how big they are.
Yeah, another shift that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is where these players are playing, and whether it be the OHL, WHL, QMJHL, we've seen the American program develop further. And, we see a guy like a Canadian born Cale Makar playing in the States. And we see Austin Matthews, for example, before he was drafted, playing in overseas in Switzerland. How do you see that shift that has gone about over the last number of years into all these different programs that players are maybe researching more into, where they can best develop all over the world, really?
Yeah, a couple answers. One, I sort of, I'm not very smart, but like 20 years ago, I said to people, like, the Americans are coming just because they have the population base. The game is getting more popular. Obviously, when it went into California, into the southern states, it's very much a rich person's game. And certainly there's a lot of wealth in the States and stuff. So the U.S. development program has done a phenomenal job. Now, with that being said, if in Canada we took the top 22 kids in the country and played them on one team and practiced every day, it wouldn't be close. And I'm not taking it away from the Americans, but they do a great job of developing their top elite players. We obviously have the major junior system. So there's all kinds of routes. I mean, it used to be if you were a small skill guy, the NCAA might be the way. If you were a big physical guy, major junior. That's completely changed. It doesn't matter. I mean, as you said, I worked for Barry as director, player personnel, director scouting. And, I mean, if there's a small skill guy, we don't even think twice about taking him now. So that's changed. I think Austin Matthews changed the paradigm a bit by going to Switzerland. Now he's obviously an elite player. He could have played in, it didn't matter where he played. He was going to go high. But yeah, I think parents, agents, everybody's more aware of the different options and situations. Cale Makar played tier 2, got drafted out of there, went down and played in the States, and you see he's become the best defenseman in the game. So there's different routes for everybody. And I think it's more open than it was. And now there's no more secrets in the world. There used to be a long time ago, where the odd Russian or European you could hide or find out about. There's no more secrets anymore. So we're going to find guys wherever they are. And, but yeah, there's a lot more options than there used to be, for sure.
I'm curious, just for yourself. I don't know if you want to call yourself out here, but I'm curious in terms of like scouting and ranks. Is there a guy that sticks in your mind that you had maybe lower in your ranks that now is kind of biting you in the behind?
The one we could spend 3 hours there. I got to rhyme off guys that I was dead wrong about, because probably the one was Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Now I know his career's kind of fallen off, but I think we finished up and our Swedish guy loved him. I just couldn't fall in love with him. Every time I saw him, and we had him, I think, at like 71 maybe. And obviously, you saw the career he started off. I mean, again, he's tailed off a bit lately, but still a very good player. He's the one guy that every time I see him play, I just think, man, like, how could you be that stupid? Like, and it'd be different if I could blame it on our Swedish guy and say, well, he didn't like him. Every time I saw him, he said, we got to move him up. And I just didn't. So there's lots of them. I mean, that's the one guy that jumps out to me for sure. But there's a whole bunch of them. I mean, in this business, George Armstrong, the former captain of the Leafs, who's passed on, was probably my biggest mentor in the game. And he used to tell me, Sides, if you get 60% right, you're in the Hall of Fame, just because there's so many mistakes made. And I'm not getting to the Hall of Fame anytime soon, because my number's a lot lower than that. But there's lots of guys that you miss on that you think, and there's guys in Ontario here that I see a ton lately. And all of a sudden, a couple of years are starring, and you're like, Jesus, we should have had him a lot higher. So there's guys you hit on, guys you miss on, but Ekman-Larsson's the one that still to this day kind of bugs me, because it was just pure stupidity on my part.
And maybe vice versa, the other way around, where you had someone higher up on your own personal list that dropped further than expected.
Probably Corey Perry.
Okay.
I love Corey Perry. I think I had him at 3 overall I was working for Minnesota at that point in the National League. I had him at 3. I loved him. I loved the way he competed. He did everything. He obviously fell all the way down. Tim Murray was scouting, the former GM of Buffalo. He was scouting for Anaheim. And we used to go watch games and travel a bit. And he loved him too. And obviously he fell to him. And he's the one guy that, sometimes you see a guy and you can just see what he's going to become. And again, sometimes you're real lucky on it. He was one guy that, as soon as I saw him, I just thought, this kid is special. I guess more recent, Moritz Seider is a guy. We had him at, I think we had him at 4 overall. Wow. A lot of these independent scouting agencies and internet guys had him, inside the first round, second round. And wow. I remember when Steve Yzerman drafted him, Elliot Friedman interviewed him at the draft, and he just said, you threw the first curve of the draft. And Steve Yzerman said, like, it wasn't a curve for us. He was the best guy on the board for us. And I felt the same way. I thought at the World Championships, he played for Germany and was just a man. And to me, it was, and again, as much as I can tell you about those two, I could go on about 25 guys that I thought were really good that weren't either. So sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you're right, but you're wrong a lot too.
Yeah, the Seider one's really interesting, because I think for me, I've always kind of considered myself like casual in terms of following prospects. Like, it's more so I do have, like, I would say, a better focus in North America. So for Seider, he was kind of just my default. When I was going through my mock drafts and going through my content, I kind of just averaged it out and put Seider, I think, around like 15 to 20 spot in the first round. And then even when like the Yzerman pick and his defense came through, I was kind of on the defense of like, why not trade down then? If you're that confident in the guy, like, why not trade down 5 or 10 spots, get an additional asset? So I was a little on Stevie Y at that time, but I think now, obviously, I think 90% of people look like a dummy on that Seider take. So,
I learned a long time ago. Mike Feud is another mentor of mine, and Feud used to say when we were in Owen Sound together, he used to say, like, if you like a guy, take him. Like, you think you might get him, and then all of a sudden go somewhere else, and you can just imagine Stevie be traded down 5 spots, and he ended up somewhere else, and now he's watching him be a rookie of the year and be an all-star. So Feud's taught me that if you like a guy, who cares what a lot of people think? If we think he's the right guy, take him. And obviously Stevie does not lack for confidence, and based on his success, that's justified, and he loved them and their staff loved them, and it's worked out for them.
Yeah, I think most people need to stop doubting Steve Yzerman. I think that's old news.
Yeah, if he calls you, hang up the phone.
So just going into the season, whether it's, I know a lot of people just the Calder favorites and the Calder conversation, but just in terms of an NHL following, do you have a few prospects or younger players that you know or you see jumping into the league that you're just maybe just as a fan or just as someone that enjoys the game that you're excited to watch this year?
Well, I think I'm excited to see Slafkovsky. I mean, we had Slafkovsky at 1 going into Christmas last year. We actually put right ahead of him right after Christmas because Shane had a great month of January. He's a big kid. I was just in Buffalo and I watched him in Buffalo at the rookie tournament. And I've seen some stuff online about he started slow and stuff. I mean, this guy's a man. I mean, the comparison I've used is Jaromir Jagr. He's obviously got to get a whole bunch stronger and stuff, but yeah. I'm really interested to see how Montreal uses him and how good he can be. Because again, a lot of guys when they're 18 and 19 coming in the league physically, they can't handle it. This kid will have no problem physically. Like when you meet this kid, I met him and you hate to say it, but I was like, I'm not sure this kid is 17 or 18. Like he's got a body and like a build like a 25-year-old man. So, he's interesting. I think, we'll see how other guys we've liked in the past, and guys like Quentin Byfield. We always knew Quentin would be a project, but and it was going to take some years, just the way he played and stuff. And I think he's coming into his own. So, guys like that, you're kind of anxious because, you see what Tim Stützle done and, Lafreniere and those guys, Kako, those kind of guys, I'm anxious to see how they do because, in their draft, we were pretty convinced they were pretty high players. And I think if fans get too anxious to label people a bust or, this isn't right. I mean, these are 18, 19-year-old literal kids playing against grown men. And it takes a while. And you saw in the playoffs last year, that Ranger line of those two, and I forget who they're playing with.
Hedel. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Philip Hedel was phenomenal. So you saw them come into their own. So I'm kind of excited to see how they, jump out this year. And now they've got that confidence from how they played in the playoffs. So guys like that, you watch get drafted and, the development curve is a little slower, but I'm anxious to see how they do this year. Yeah.
It's almost like these generational players, I know that that's a buzzword and it gets overused, but guys like Matthews, McDavid, Makar that have come in and let the league on fire right away have almost made it, unfair to these guys that need some more time at 18, 19, 20. Just like you said, they're young men developing into their bodies, developing into their skill set. So it's going to be interesting to see those guys that are in year 3, year 4 that haven't maybe hit that potential that people think they're going to get to as of yet. So what do you think about, when it comes to developing players when they get to the NHL? Is it, I assume it's all just dependent on, everybody's a case by case basis, but is there, a magic number that you're looking for usually at 23, 24, 25 as to when they should really take that step in today's NHL? Because I know it's changed the last 10 or so years.
Yeah, I think, you hit on one of the biggest things and scouting staffs and guys get crucified if a draft doesn't go well and the players don't turn out. And, like I say, it's a 50-50 battle. It's your draft is important, but so is the development. Some teams do a really, really good job. Some teams, quite frankly, do a very poor job. And we've seen some of those cases of guys. I'm a guy that patience is a virtue because, if you're trying to win now and if you think an 18-year-old is going to come in and help you win a Stanley Cup, it's not going to happen. I mean, even Connor McDavid at 18 wasn't helping anybody win a Stanley Cup as phenomenal as he was. So patience, I think, is the way to go with these guys. I mean, I expect Shane Wright will be back in Kingston. I think everybody seems to think he's going to be in Seattle. Ronnie France is a very smart, patient, calm guy, and I expect he'll be back in Kingston. And I'm sure Shane and his agency don't want to hear that, but it won't shock me. And I think Ronnie gets it, and a lot of teams get it now. Another quote I heard one time is, nobody's ever been hurt by playing a year in the American Hockey League. Nobody's career really ever suffered from playing 1 year. You learn to go from maybe junior or the NCAA to pro hockey and playing against men all the time. So, I think slow and steady is the way to go. You look at what Tampa's done. Al Murray, I think he's the best in the business in terms of scouting, but then they've got the development piece they've done a phenomenal job with, even when Steve was there and even now with Breezeball. So I think slow and steady. You see teams that rush them, and over the years, you've seen guys sort of flame out and, it's easy now, but I mean, if you look back, Lafreniere probably should have went back to junior. I mean, he might have benefited from that. Capo Caco probably maybe should have played a year. Like there's some guys like that I think maybe. But the problem you get in when you get a real high pick like that, the marketing department is all over it, right? Like Lafreniere, New York City, we can market them, we can sell tickets, and they want to sell tickets. Owners love to sell tickets and make money. So there's always that battle of the first or second or third overall pick. Do you keep them? Those guys are going crazy, but you're probably better off, send them somewhere else. So it's always a battle, but I think slow and steady is the much better way to go.
Yeah, I think Shane was one of those guys that definitely, I mean, I think it's across the board, but Shane's one of those guys that probably that year off with the pandemic, he probably battled through that. And I think, yeah, what you said, an extra year, I think the ability to dominate, I was in the building watching Shane and just seeing his ability. The guy could dominate. The guy could dominate at any point. I think even the defensive side of things. But I think even more so like the offensive explosion from him, I think the production could be there and at such a higher rate. So I don't think it would be a bad thing, especially with Seattle up the middle. I'm looking at Wright not in that equation, and they have 4 pretty solid centers there. So I would say go back to Kingston, light it up, put up 2 points per game plus, and then go to Seattle the following year. So I definitely am with you on that.
I think in terms of Shane, you talk about the pandemic and stuff. The really weird thing for me was he went as an underage to the under-18 championships, if you remember, down in Texas, and was phenomenal, like dominated. And that led us into the beginning of last year. And so that was after the pandemic, after the year off. And then he came back last year, and like I said, there were some nights he was really, really good, and some nights where he was still good, but he just wasn't as dominant. So I think that is the case. And I can see, it wouldn't even shock me if he goes back to Kingston and all of a sudden Kingston trades him somewhere, because they can really rebuild everything and maybe send him to somebody who is really ready to overpay. So it'll be interesting to see how Shane Wright's kind of start to the season goes, and if he ends up somewhere, or does he go back to Kingston and stay there?
Yeah. And with Wright, sorry, because I was just going to say quickly, just on that conversation, and a scouting background, just with Shane Wright and his kind of attitude and just kind of the stuff he was saying, do you think that played a part in any capacity where like the overconfidence being a thing? I mean, I look at Slafkovsky, even with Montreal, it seemed like he even had some overconfidence, but that kind of went to his favor. So do you think maybe that played a part in it a little bit?
No, like teams that interviewed him, and Montreal interviewed him multiple times, guys interviewed him, and he's a great, mature kid. Some of the stuff that gets, again, fancy sort of publicly, and they think it comes down to who you think is going to be the best player.
Yeah.
I know, there was talk about Montreal being the environment they were. Some of the things they did when they interviewed all the prospects that they talked to, they really put pressure on because they needed to have mentally strong guys. And Shane certainly fit that bill. But I don't think comments he made publicly about having confidence and things like that really was at the end of the day. I mean, again, we had him at 4, just we thought he was the 4th best player in the draft. And, I think that's ultimately where he went. And but we didn't drop him to 4 because of anything he said. I mean, I like the young man. I think he's really mature and smart and great family and everything. It's just at the end of the day, you're just trying to pick the best player you can at those spots. And Seattle got him at 4.
Yeah, and there's always the games that Seattle could potentially play him in at the start of the year, right? And give him a few games to get his feet wet and send him down. I know it can be disappointing for the prospect to go through that, but that is also an option. But yeah, John, did you have anything else?
I was just going to say that's exactly what McTavish did. I don't think, and I think if anything, it's been a conversation, like the amount of teams, the amount of different environments McTavish just went through in the past year. And I don't think that slowed him down at all. I think that made him adaptable. I think that strengthened his game. And I think now he's going to go into Anaheim and be super dominant, or at least as a young player, right?
Yeah, I think, again, Mason is a guy, like you said, I don't know, he played 7 teams last year, something like that. And, playing in the Olympics as an 18-year-old and stuff like that. So, I think he's going to be the next captain of Anaheim. I really do. As a very young player, I think that won't shock me at all. And you're right. I mean, again, everybody has their own path, but, certainly the path he took looks like it's paying off right now. And he should have a very good year in Anaheim.
Mark, just to kind of close out the chat, just on the NHL side of things, whether it's a younger roster or just an overall conversation, because we talk a lot of NHL on this channel. Do you have a team that just on a hot take maybe basis that you think is going to surprise a lot of people this year maybe?
That's a good question.
Or it could be an NHL player. It could be honestly anything. If you have a little bit of a hot take for us on the way out.
No, I think, and I don't think it's a real secret probably, but the Rangers to me are a team that are really on the up here. I think as we talked earlier about those young players coming into their own, in net they're set. I think, and again, that's not a big secret. Like you watch what they did last year and in the playoffs and stuff, but they're a team that I think is starting to get built the right way. Chris Drury is doing a really good job there. They've been patient. I think their scouting staff is phenomenal. So they're kind of a team that I think, don't be shocked if all of a sudden you turn on the TV next June and they're in the Cup Finals. I just think they've got that much ability with some of their veterans and then those young guys coming in their own. So they're a team I certainly want to watch. And, let's face it, the Maple Leafs are always interesting, whether they're as good as they are or if they struggle. I mean, there's no shortage of stuff to see there and with that team. So, but I think the Rangers are the one team that, again, not a secret, but I think they're going to have a very, very good year.
Well, the odds came out today. Sheldon Keefe is favored to be the first coach that gets scrapped. So we'll see what happens.
John, don't say that. We want a Rangers Leafs conference finals. That would be good for the ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I do really appreciate it. Is just for yourself, I don't know if you want to throw anything out there, but is there a spot where people can follow what you got going on, or just on social media, or is there a spot where if people asked they could find you?
Yeah, no, I'm on Twitter. Twitter's kind of been my thing that I've done. So it's at Mark Seidel, MarkSeidel. Don't really, like with our scouting company, North American Central Scouting, we don't really do much with fans. It's more team based, stuff like that. So not really. I'm very happy to be on with you guys. I enjoyed the conversation. If you ever want me back, I'd be happy to come on and chat. And that's about it. And my Barrie Colts will get started here in a week and a half, and we'll see how that year goes. But it's going to be a good year, exciting year. But like I said, at the beginning, I'm a big fan of you guys and the channel. So you ever need anything, by all means, let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I hope to chat again soon. So Mark Seidel, thank you so much for coming on, and excited for the prospects of the going into the NHL or the guys that are going to be there and the upcoming season. So thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.